keep this in mind. You're talking to a nation that has a very, that is very aware of its history. I mean, history of Bulgaria and history in general of the Balkans is big topics always in schools and among people. Bulgarians live in a place where you can look around and see signs of history, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years old around them. And yet, can they really interpret history right from a non-biblical, non-Protestant perspective? Tell us, what is history according to the Bible, according to from the position of the Reformation? What is history? How should we look at it? Is history just a set of events that are just happening to people, or is there something more to history than that?
Bulgaria has lived through communism. And communism, I believe, is a heresy, really apostasy from Christianity. And at the center of communism are the historical forces. Communism was very much geared to the idea that there is progress in history. Marx had that as a fundamental element of his faith, that there would be growth of economic power, growth of wealth over time, and that the social order was a reflection, as he would call it, a superstructure of the means of production and the mode of production. That's very Western in its outlook. And it's really Protestant in its outlook, except that he secularized history and made it authoritative instead of a personal God. So you might say that he believed that history predestinates societies and men, but God doesn't. Whereas, at least within the Calvinist realm of Protestantism, we believe that God predestinates society and predestinates men, but that there is a pattern of history that is meaningful, and both the Marxists and the Calvinists believe this, that history has meaning, that it is relevant, that the study of history is relevant. And it is interesting that among the most competent of all the economic historians of the mid-20th century were the Marxists. That was the one area in Western academic life in which Marxists made significant contributions, because they were very careful to find the primary source documents and study them, but of course always within the Marxist framework of interpretation. But they were first-rate historians, and we're very grateful that they did the hard work that they did to discover these ancient documents, well, not ancient, but 400 or 500 years old, and to begin putting the pieces together. The trouble is, the puzzle was constructed in terms of a Marxist outlook, and they had to hammer those pieces to make them fit, because God does not operate in terms of the mode of production being sovereign. What Bulgarians should recognize is that they now have two traditions. One is a respect for the history of the country, and Bulgaria has fought enough wars, and the Balkan nations have fought enough wars against each other for a long period of time, that each nation is very much committed to its own interpretation of history, because men died on the battlefield over and over and over for fairly small pieces of territory. So there's a nationalist, strong nationalist component of all of Balkan history. So we should take advantage of that, because history is not meaningless. History is not just a bunch of wars. People fight for reasons. What we have to look for is this: is the pattern of history based on the biblical principle that obedience to the law of God brings positive sanctions, and disobedience to the law of God brings negative sanctions in history to societies? And where you would be wise to look is to find out what are the causes of the wars, what were the justifications of the wars, where were men called to give their lives and why, for the kingdom of God or the kingdom of man. And that's where I would start looking. And in, I think, almost every society, if you don't know the history of your wars, you don't know the history of your society, because men fight wars over and over and over. Find out what the terms of the battle were. Find out what the standards of warfare were. Find out what men were called on by the leaders to risk their lives for, because those are the fundamental issues of society. Now, what we want to say is that the Prince of Peace has a tendency, when his laws are obeyed, to bring blessings and less war. And when you see war after war after war, you had better assume this is the kingdom of man. This is not the kingdom of God. This is not the gospel working its way through society, changing the hearts of men. When men take up arms against each other over and over and over, you have to assume that's the kingdom of man in action. But we have to look at the pattern of cause and effect. And the biblical pattern is, when you obey the laws of God, there will be positive sanctions. And when you consistently disobey the law of God, there will be negative sanctions. And that's how you look at the history of any society, in terms of, why do the negative sanctions keep coming over and over? Why was there no progress? It's not because history has no progress. History does have progress. But it's covenantal progress. It's not military progress. And so much of modern man is, they rate the advance of society in terms of the destructive power of the technology. And then we got to the hydrogen bomb, and we thought, maybe we'd better not look at history that way. We don't need something more powerful than the atomic bomb or the hydrogen bomb. We have to look at man's progress in something other than warfare and the ability to inflict damage on the other man. This is not a position of pacifism, but it is a position that you say the essence of growth and progress in society is not the ability of the state to impose its will on other people. That the progress is based on conformity to the law of God, the free market society, the advance of technology, the advance of medical technology. These are legitimate areas where there will be progress if men conform themselves to the biblical standards of right and wrong. If we teach our children that, Ben Franklin made famous the phrase, honesty is the best policy. But most societies accept some version of that because they teach their children not to be criminals. If you teach your child not to be criminal, and then you tell them, and by the way, you'll be living in tyranny all of your life because you're honest, this is not an effective way to teach children. You teach children that if you do the right thing and you obey your parents and you obey the society around you, you will prosper. If we teach our children that with respect to family law, why don't we teach our societies that in terms of civil law? And I think we maybe don't believe it in civil law, but we should believe it.